Sunshine. Part 1. The Fire. Detroit. Chapter 1. Ashes in the Wind. Detroit, April 1970. The air smelled of smoke and wet ash. Georgia May Wilson stood in the middle of her living room, glass crunching beneath her shoes. The front window had been shattered 2 nights earlier. Someone had spray-painted a jagged slur across the brick outside. She didn't need to read it again. She moved quickly, folding clothes into the old suitcase on the couch. Jeans for Sunshine, her good dress, the small leather notebook where she kept addresses. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked toward the hallway. "Sunshine, baby, you almost ready?" A soft voice answered from the bedroom. "Almost, Mama." Georgia paused, pressing a hand to her chest. Her daughter's voice still carried the faint California lilt she had picked up from stories. Sunshine, named for the town where she was conceived on Tom's aunt's dusty farm under a sky so wide it felt like another world. Georgia was 32, tall, graceful, with warm brown skin and eyes that had seen too much. A degree in social economics from Wayne State sat on the floor, half buried under fallen books. She had once believed education and love could bridge any gap. Life had tested that belief hard. She thought of Tom, her Tom, somewhere across an ocean or stationed stateside. The letters had grown thin, drafted right after they learned she was carrying Sunshine. He had wanted to come home. The military had other plans. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Georgia? It's Louise, her neighbor." Georgia cracked the door, chain still on. "You hear about the new fires on 12th Street, Louise whispered. "They saying it's spreading again tonight? You really leaving?" "First light," Georgia answered. "Bus to the airport, then California. My sister's waiting in Malibu." Louise nodded slowly. "Smart, real smart. This city? It's eating itself alive since Dr. King fell." Georgia closed the door gently and went back to packing. In the bedroom doorway, Sunshine appeared, 14 years old, long limbs, curious eyes that mixed her mother's depth with her father's lighter tones. Her hair was a wild halo of curls. She clutched a small suitcase covered in stickers. "Mama, will Daddy meet us there?" Georgia swallowed the lump in her throat. "I hope so, baby. I surely do." Outside, distant sirens wailed, another night in the city of broken dreams. But for Georgia May and her daughter Sunshine, tomorrow held the promise of palm trees, ocean air, and a chance to start over, far from the ashes of 1970 Detroit. Chapter 2. The Girl Named Sunshine. Sunshine sat on the edge of her bed, tracing the edge of a sticker on her suitcase with her fingernail. She could hear her mother moving through the apartment, the quiet efficiency of someone who had already made up her mind. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she understood enough. The city was angry. People were breaking things. And Mama was scared. Sunshine had always known she was different. Her skin was a warm brown that darkened in summer. Her hair a mix of tight coils and loose waves. At school, some kids called her light bright or high yellow. Others just stared. She had learned early how to make herself small when she needed to. She thought about her father. Mama said his name was Tom Wilson. He was white. He had been drafted into the army before Sunshine was born. Sometimes letters came in envelopes with foreign stamps. Mama would read them out loud sometimes, her voice soft. Sunshine kept everyone in a shoebox under her bed. She didn't remember his face, but she remembered the way Mama's voice changed when she talked about him, like she was holding something precious and fragile at the same time. A crash sounded somewhere down the block. Sunshine flinched. "Mama?" Georgia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "It's all right, baby. Just keep packing. We're leaving in the morning." Sunshine nodded. She looked around her small room one last time. The faded posters on the wall, the stack of library books on the nightstand, the little radio that only sometimes worked. She wondered if she would ever see any of it again. She didn't know what California would be like. She only knew that her mother believed it was safer than here. And right now, that was enough. Chapter 3. Waitress in the Slums. The diner smelled of grease and burnt coffee. Georgia tied her apron behind her back and stepped behind the counter, nodding at the cook. Her feet already ached, but she pushed the feeling down. There was no room for it. She poured coffee for the regulars, took orders, smiled when she needed to smile. Most of the customers were kind enough. Some weren't. She had learned long ago which ones to keep her distance from. A man in a stained work shirt sat at the counter. He watched her for a while before speaking. "You got that look," he said, "like you're already gone." Georgia kept pouring coffee. "Just tired." Lot of folks tired these days." He took a sip. "Heard you might be leaving." She didn't answer. The man leaned in slightly. "Your little girl, she got that same look sometimes, like she's waiting on something that ain't coming back." George's hand tightened on the coffee pot. The man sat back. "Hope wherever you're going treats you better than this place." She nodded once and moved down the counter. Later, during a quiet moment, she stepped into the back alley for air. She pulled the latest letter from Tom out of her apron pocket. The paper was already soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. She didn't read it again. She just held it for a moment, then tucked it away. When her shift ended, she walked home through streets that still smelled of smoke. She kept her head down and her steps quick. When she reached their building, she paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at their window. The light was on. Sunshine was waiting. Georgia straightened her shoulders and climbed the steps. Chapter 4. Echoes from Dearborn, 1955. The first time Georgia May noticed Tom Wilson, she was 15. She was walking home from school when she saw him across the street, standing outside a small corner store with 2 other white boys. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, not the way some white boys looked, like she was something to stare at or laugh about. He looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle. She kept walking. The second time, it was raining. She was waiting under the awning of a bus stop when he appeared beside her, holding a newspaper over his head like an umbrella. He didn't speak. He just stood there, sharing the small dry space. After that, she started noticing him more often. He lived in Dearborn Heights. She lived in the neighborhood just across the invisible line. Their worlds were supposed to stay separate. But sometimes, when the weather was bad or the streets were quiet, their paths crossed. They never spoke for years, but they always noticed each other. Chapter 5. The Elopement, 1965. Georgia was 17 when she told Tom she was pregnant. They had been seeing each other in secret for almost a year, stolen hours in parks, late-night walks, letters passed through friends. When she told him, his face went pale, then determined. "We're not doing this here," he said. "Not like this." 2 days later, they left. They hitchhiked most of the way to California, sleeping in bus stations and cheap motels when they could afford it. Tom's aunt had a small farm outside the town of Sunshine. She was the only person in his family who had never made him feel ashamed for loving Georgia May. They arrived dusty and exhausted. Tom's aunt took one look at them and smiled. "About time," she said. One of Tom's cousins, a young pastor, married them in the backyard under a wooden arch his uncle had built years ago. There were no fancy dresses or big crowds, just the two of them, Tom's aunt, and a few cousins who had decided love mattered more than the rules. Georgia wore a simple white dress she had bought at a second-hand store. Tom wore his best shirt. When they kissed, Georgia felt something settle in her chest for the first time in months. For 3 weeks, they stayed on the farm. They walked the fields. They talked about names for the baby. They pretended, for a little while, that the rest of the world didn't exist. Then they went back to Detroit. Chapter 6. Drafted. The letter came on a Tuesday. Tom opened it at the kitchen table while Georgia made breakfast. He read it twice before setting it down. "I have to go," he said quietly. Georgia didn't turn around. She kept stirring the eggs. "When?" 2 weeks. She nodded. Her hand trembled slightly on the spatula. Tom stood and came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "I'll write every chance I get," he said, "and I'll send money, as much as I can." Georgia turned in his arms and pressed her face into his chest. "You better come back to us," she whispered. "I will," he promised. "I swear it." 2 weeks later, she stood on the platform and watched the train carry him away. She kept one hand on her growing belly the entire time.